The first time they told her she was not wanted, it was done quiet, like most cruel things out west, whispered between the hitching post and the false front of Miller's store, where dust hung in the air and judgment hung heavier. She heard it, even though they thought she would not. The words slithered through the heat, sharp as cactus spines, and she stood there with a paper parcel in her hands and a heart that had already learned how to brace for blows. She had come to the town of Red Willow with nothing but a carpet bag and hope stitched thin as old cloth, and now hope was fraying fast, because the West could be wide and open and still find a way to shut its doors tight on a woman like her. She kept walking because stopping would mean breaking, and breaking was a luxury she had long ago learned she could not afford. Her boots scuffed the dirt, her shoulders stayed straight even as eyes followed her, measuring, weighing, deciding she did not belong. Red Willow was the kind of town that remembered sins longer than kindness, and nobody cared that hers were borrowed, assumed, painted onto her by rumor and fear. She had not stolen, she had not lied, she had not done half the things they claimed. But the West did not always care for truth, it cared for stories, and hers had been written without her consent. The trouble was, she had nowhere else to go. The train had left her here 3 weeks ago, and the money was nearly gone. She had taken work where she could, washing, mending, keeping quiet, but quiet only made people louder. The women looked at her like she was a threat. The men looked like they were curious and ashamed of it, and curiosity often turned mean when left alone too long. So when the shopkeeper's wife finally said it plain, told her she ought to leave before something happened, it felt less like advice and more like a sentence. She reached the edge of town before she let the tears come, where the wooden buildings thinned and the land stretched wide and empty. The prairie did not judge her. It only waited. Wind pulled at her skirt, tugged her hair loose, and for a moment she thought about stepping off the road, about letting the West swallow her whole, because disappearing seemed easier than being unwanted. But then she heard hooves, slow, steady, unhurried, the kind that belonged to a man who was not afraid of anything this town could say. He rode in like he had all the time in the world, hat low, shoulders broad, dust clinging to him like an old friend. His horse was the color of burnt sugar and moved with the confidence of long miles. He saw her standing there with red eyes and clenched fists, saw the way she tried to look smaller than she was, and something in his chest tightened, because he knew that look had worn it himself once. When the war ended and the world decided it had no use for broken men, he did not ask her what she had done, did not ask why the town had turned against her. He knew better than to trust a crowd. Instead, he tipped his hat and spoke her name, not loud, not soft, just certain. And hearing her name spoken like it mattered nearly undid her. Before she could stop herself, the words spilled out. How they told her she was not wanted, how she was supposed to leave by sundown, how she had nowhere left to run. The wind carried her confession away, but he stayed, listening like it was the only thing worth doing. They came then, 3 men and a woman, faces set hard with righteousness, the kind that never questioned itself. They told her she had been warned, told him it was none of his business. The street felt smaller with them standing there, like the whole town was leaning in to watch. She felt the old fear rise, the instinct to step back, to disappear, but before she could move, his hand closed around hers, warm, steady, real, and he spoke words that would echo through Red Willow longer than any lie ever had. "You are with me," he said, and in that moment, the town's voice cracked silence followed, thick and dangerous, the kind that came before storms or gunfire. She felt every eye on them, felt the weight of his grip like an anchor keeping her from drifting apart. The men muttered, the woman scoffed, but none of them stepped closer, because something in the cowboy's stance said he would not bend, he would not be moved. And as he guided her past them, back toward the heart of a town that had already judged her, she realized that for the first time since she arrived in the West, she was not standing alone. And sometimes that was all it took to change the shape of a V walk through Red Willow. Like 2 people stepping into a windstorm they could already feel but not yet see. His hands still wrapped around hers, firm but gentle, as if he knew she might bolt if he loosened his grip. The boardwalk creaked beneath their boots, every sound too loud, every breath too sharp. Doors that had once stood open now closed with quiet finality, and windows held faces half hidden behind lace or dust, watching, judging, waiting for him to falter. She could feel the weight of their stares pressing against her back, could hear her name hissed like a curse, and with each step her heart beat harder. not just from fear, but from something new and dangerous. The fragile beginning of hope. At the center of town he stopped, right where the dirt met the boards and the road split 3 ways, the symbolic heart of Red Willow, if a place like this could be said to have one. He turned to face the people gathering, his jaws set, eyes steady, a man who had buried too many friends to be frightened by opinions. He spoke slow and clear, told them she would be staying at his ranch, told them she would be treated with respect, or they would answer to him. The words were not shouted, they did not need to be, they carried the weight of truth and the promise of consequence. And though some scoffed, and others sneered, none challenged him outright, because the West remembered men like him, men who did not bluff. She stood beside him, trying to breathe, trying not to shake. Her fingers curled into his sleeve, like it was the only solid thing left in the world. She felt exposed, stripped bare by rumor and resentment, but she also felt protected in a way she never had before. It was not just that he stood there, it was how he stood, as if she were worth the trouble, worth the risk, worth the fight, and that belief, borrowed though it was, steadied her spine, lifted her chin. If she was to be judged, she would not bow her head. The ride out of town was quiet, the kind of quiet that followed confrontation, heavy and unresolved. She sat behind him on the saddle, hands gripping his coat, the horse moving with a rhythm that slowly eased her racing heart. The town shrank behind them, its sharp edges softened by distance, until it was nothing more than a cluster of stubborn buildings clinging to the prairie. She wondered what kind of man would stake his reputation on a stranger, wondered what debt or wound had taught him such defiance. And though she wanted to ask, the words stayed lodged in her throat. Some questions felt too intimate for daylight. His ranch lay nestled against a rise of land that caught the wind and broke it gentle. The house was plain but sturdy, weathered wood, and a porch that had seen many sunsets. It smelled of leather, coffee, and open air, a place built for survival, not show. He helped her down, his hands careful, respectful, and for a moment she stood there unsure, like a guest who did not know the rules. He showed her the spare room, told her it was hers as long as she needed, told her she could help if she wanted, but owed him nothing. The words lodged deep in her chest, owed him nothing. She had never been told that before the first night. She barely slept. Every sound set her nerves on edge. The creak of the house, the distant howl of a coyote, the wind brushing the eaves. She lay staring at the ceiling, replaying the day over and over, the way his hand had closed around hers, the way the town had fallen silent. She wondered if he would regret it come morning, if the weight of Red Willow's disapproval would prove heavier than his resolve. But dawn came soft and golden, and he was still there, already up, already working, as steady as the land itself. Days settled into a rhythm, feeding stock, mending fences, sharing quiet meals. He did not pry, did not ask her to explain herself, and that space allowed her to breathe, to exist without defense. She found strength in simple tasks, found pride in honest work, and slowly the tight knot inside her loosened. They talked in the evenings, about weather, about the land, about the war he rarely mentioned, and the past she carefully avoided. Trust grew like grass after rain, gradual but persistent, and sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression she could not yet name. Still, Red Willow loomed in the distance, its judgment not so easily escaped. Supplies had to be bought, mail collected, business conducted, and each trip into town carried the threat of renewed hostility. He insisted on going with her the first time, his presence a shield, but she sensed he would not always be there to stand between her and the world. The thought both frightened and steeled her, because whatever she was becoming out here, it would have to be enough on its own. And as she looked across the land at sunset, the sky burning with color, she realized that belonging was not given by towns or crowds, it was forged, one brave step at a time. The trouble did not come all at once. It rarely ever did. It crept in slow like a bad weather front, felt before it was seen. She noticed it in the way the air seemed tighter on the ranch, in how the cowboy paused longer when he scanned the horizon, in how Red Willow sent its messengers in sideways glances and half-spoken warnings. A delivery boy mentioned her name with a smirk. A ranch hand muttered about town meetings and angry words, and though no one said it outright, she knew the place she had found was being challenged. The West had a way of circling back to unfinished business when the truth finally surfaced. It came from a man she did not recognize, but somehow had always feared. He rode up one afternoon with dust on his coat and hunger in his eyes, called her by the name she had buried, spoke it like a weapon. The cowboy stepped between them before she could react. But the damage was done. The past she had fled had found her. Accusations of theft that had never been proven. A dead man whose sins had been pinned on her because someone had to pay. Red Willow had believed the worst because it was easier than doubt, and now they wanted her gone for good, or handed over to a law that had never been kind to women without protection. That night the ranch felt smaller than ever, walls closing in with every word spoken. She finally told the cowboy everything, not as defense but as surrender. The lies told about her, the fear that had driven her onto that train, the years spent running from shadows. She expected disappointment, maybe even anger, but he listened like he always had, quiet, unwavering. When she finished, he took her hands again, the same way he had in town, and said that running did not make her guilty, that surviving was not a crime. His belief was not blind, it was chosen, and that made it stronger. Red Willow came for them at dawn, not with guns blazing but with authority wrapped in righteousness. The sheriff rode at the front, warrant folded neat in his pocket. The town gathered behind him like a single breathing thing. She stood on the porch beside the cowboy, fear twisting in her gut, but she did not step back. The cowboy spoke first, laid out the truth plain, challenged the accusations, demanded proof that had never existed. Voices rose, tempers flared. The moment balanced on the edge of violence, until the sheriff hesitated, doubt flickering where certainty had lived, because the West respected courage, and the cowboy had more of it than the whole town combined. The standoff ended not with blood, but with choice. The sheriff folded the warrant back into his coat, said he would not take a woman on rumor alone. The crowd shifted, some angry, some relieved, some ashamed. Red Willow did not apologize. Towns like that rarely did, but they stepped back, one by one, the threat dissolving into dust and distance. She felt her knees weaken only after they were gone, felt the weight of what had almost happened crash over her, and the cowboy caught her before she fell, holding her like she was something precious. Not disposable. Word traveled fast after that, faster than lies ever had. The town softened, not all at once, not completely, but enough. A woman from the store brought bread, left it without comment. A rancher tipped his hat when she passed. The West did not erase its mistakes, but it learned to live with them, and she learned something too. That standing still could be braver than running, that being seen was terrifying and powerful all at once, and that the man beside her had changed the course of her life without ever trying to own it. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon and the land glowed like it was holding its breath, the cowboy finally spoke the words that had been riding between them for weeks. He told her he did not save her, that she had done that herself. He only stood where he was needed. She laughed softly at that, because she knew the truth, that sometimes survival required a hand reaching out at the right moment. She told him she did not know where she would have gone without him, and he answered the only way a man like him could, saying she did not have to go anywhere unless she wanted to. She stayed, not because the ranch was safe, not because Red Willow had changed, but because she had. The West stretched out before her, still wild, still unforgiving, but no longer empty. As she stood beside the cowboy, her hand in his, she understood what his words had meant that day in town. "You are with me" was not ownership, it was choice, it was partnership, it was standing shoulder to shoulder against a world that tried to decide your worth. And as the wind moved across the land and the future opened wide, she knew she was no longer unwanted, she was exactly where she belonged.